federal preemption, and they don't sue Utah. So the executive branch is not willing to even enforce the laws that are on the books. The branches are not eager to do so. So I looked around and I asked, what department in the federal government likes to enforce the law? Who really kind of licks their chops and goes out there? It's the IRS. And so I want to bring the IRS into this as well. And because there are a lot of taxes that aren't being paid, is another big part of it. So I introduced, I drafted in the previous Congress and introduced and will introduce sometime in the next couple of months, legislation called the New Idea Act. And what it does is it establishes, it clarifies that wages and benefits paid to illegals are not deductible for federal income tax purposes. And clarifies that. It should be the case, it should be enforced now, but it clarifies it. It gives the employer safe harbor if they use E-Verify. So they can run the names of the name, rank, and serial number of the employees through E-Verify. And so that is safe harbor. It says in the bill safe harbor. But the result of it will be that if you lose the deductibility of wages paid out, say you're an employer and you pay out $1 million in wages to people who can't lawfully work in the United States, then the IRS comes in and does an audit. They'll look at that and say, well, just a minute. Your Schedule C deduction here for wages goes away. It goes over here to the gross receipts side and calculates out to be net income that's taxable. And that taxable income then, coupled with the penalty and the interest, converts your $10 an hour illegal into about a $16 an hour illegal. And that opens up a job for someone who can lawfully work in America, legal immigrants and American citizens, in that area of $13, $14, $15 an hour. I want to get that passed. We're waiting for a score from the Joint Committee on Taxation so that we've got to thread it through the Ways and Means Committee. It's a very hard thing to get done in the scenario that we have. That's the number one thing that I would do to make the change. And I think that it would allow the employers to take a look at their workforce, voluntarily clean up their workforce, and with the IRS, they're going to be in knocking on your door for your business most likely a couple times every decade. So you don't want to have that accumulated liability to the IRS. That's what I would do. But I don't think anything gets passed. I think in this, between now and the next election, you see a lot of posturing, a lot of political posturing, and the president, though, suspending the deportation of people as long as provided it's inconvenient for them. People that are have their primary caregiver, have somebody in the family that's in the military, or a few other things on that list. It's an abdication of his oath of office, and we must hold the president accountable for it. And I said earlier, I believe I sent out a notice that I'm calling for insisting on hearings in the House Judiciary Committee, and I'm going to push to get that done. There are also 300,000 that are already adjudicated for deportation, but the final deportation orders haven't come yet. So they suspend that and go back and review all 300,000 cases to see if there's anybody there that has a family member in the military or their primary caregiver, or it's otherwise inconvenient for them to submit to U.S. federal law. And you can't have a rule of law if you're not going to enforce it. So that's where I stand. I hope that's a full answer. Unless you have follow-up.
Well,
You want?
no, it's just the idea is that, well, I know people on the hospital board here, our local hospital, and they write off tons of money every year. And they said it isn't all because of illegal immigration, no. But they said the big share of it is. And you're thinking, our little hospital, what do major cities incur when they can't collect?
I can give you an answer that I know directly, and that is I go down to the border and do surprise visits down there at the Port of Entry. I did a surprise visit at the Port of Entry in Arizona at Sassabee, Arizona. While I'm there talking to the supervisor, he says, excuse me, he came back in a couple minutes and he said, there's going to be an ambulance come across from the Mexican side here in a little bit. There's going to be American ambulances come down. I've called the helicopter in. There's a knife fight in Mexico, and we're going to life flight this fella that's been cut up to Tucson, 70 miles up the desert. And so I had a paramedic with me, and so I said, I want you to jump in there, Mike, and go see if you can save the guy's life. And while you're doing that, pay attention to all the things going on here so I know what happened. So he jumped in on that, and we helped, but put oxygen on him. The Mexican ambulance had several pairs of gloves and a little bit of gauze and nothing else. It was just the shell of an ambulance and a meat wagon. And we put oxygen on him from a U.S. ambulance that arrived before the helicopter. A second ambulance arrived. Then the helicopter came in. We loaded him on a helicopter, flew him to Tucson. I went up there the next day. I went wanted to know the results of what had happened. They say that he'd been stabbed in the liver, or your wife, and actually talked to him a little bit. But I also talked to the chief financial officer, and later on brought them to testify before Congress. It cost Tucson University Hospital, which is the most southerly trauma center in Arizona, the rest of it going broke, at that time, $15 million a year to provide that kind of coverage for illegals. And story after story, but you know them. That's an example, 15 million there, and trauma centers from their south are all closed because they can't afford to stay open. It's not as bad here, but it's really bad there.
Congressman King. Hey, Ken Snyder, had a chance to meet before. A couple of points. You know, I know some of the talks are around possibly changing Social Security for especially my age group. I just turned 51. And to be honest with you, I would be in favor of that, pushing it back if that's what it takes to balance the budget. I think that's a fair thing to go after. We're living longer, we're living healthier. I think that's a fair one to go after. The other thing, just on the farm bill, I know they're started the debate on the 2012 farm bill, and I do farm. I think counter-cyclical payments are something that could be looked at, especially in the time of prosperity in the farming community. One thing I would debate would be conservation reserve program, especially the continuous practices. I think there's such an environmental benefit to our water quality, and in a day when we're going to try and produce over 200 bushel corn on as many acres as we can by putting more nitrogen on, I think we do need to try and still take care of our water. I think Paul Johnson said it best. He was head of the DNR a few years back, and I remember him saying, he farms up northeast Iowa, he said, the most valuable commodity to come off my farm is probably my water, not my corn and beans. And I think that hit home with me then, and it still does now. We have to be a little careful of what we're doing with our water. And I don't consider myself an environmentalist by any standpoint, because I realize if we grow a tree, we need to harvest a tree if we want that door over there. But I am a conservationist. I do think we need to take care of what we have, but also not, abusing the system. But anyway, thank you for your conviction. I enjoyed listening to you. And anytime you can get on that Jan Michelson program, WHO reaches over here far and wide, and we're able to listen to it. And I do appreciate you being on that program as much as you can be. So thank you.
Well, thank you a lot, Kenny. And it's where we had a chance to meet. We had a chance to shoot some birds together on a couple of occasions, which is we don't know what kind of what conservationist Kenny is, and worked hard for habitat and pheasants forever, especially in Carroll County. You can see I can drive down there gravel and paving in Carroll County and see the hand of Kenny Snyder on that over and over again. And I appreciate the work that you're doing from a habitat standpoint. That'll be part of the discussion as we go forward into a farm bill. I want to go back and touch the Social Security component of that initially. And if we look at the entitlements, that being Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest is also now an entitlement. It's part of what has to be. And but of those, the hardest one to solve is Medicare. I'm glad you didn't ask that question, because now I don't have to solve that problem right now. Social Security is kind of manageable in that one of the things that would help the Social Security Trust Fund account a lot is if we can get the 9.2% unemployment down to something around half of that. Would make a dramatic difference in the money that's flowing in and from payroll into the Social Security Trust Fund. But that doesn't solve the problem. And it's true with Medicare and with Social Security that if we chug along in the way we're doing, we will hit the wall eventually. Now, it's one thing that we can step up and embrace this problem and bring the things forward to solve it, or we can go reluctantly. But in either case, we probably end up with about the same result. It's more painful when you go reluctantly, and it's less visionary when you go reluctantly. So we've seen the baby boomers coming for a long time. I am one. I'm about exactly in the middle of the baby boomer generation. And we've known that the pressure on Social Security and Medicare was coming, but we've been politically unwilling to solve the problem. We're a rich country with all kinds of technology. We have the ability to solve any problem that can be solved. And the problem we always have is how do we resolve the political barrier to do the right thing? So some of these things with Social Security, there are just a few options. One of them is adjust the cap, and another one is raise the age. Another one is to lower the benefits. Those are the three things that I can think of that come in some combination to solve the Social Security situation that we have. And then, of course, another one would be to allow people to own part of their own retirement plan so that they can control their own destiny. This will eventually come in some form, and that combination will be the forces, the political forces that are weighing in on it, more so probably than the economic logic that we would devise. I'm sorry that it's true. I know I have to say it, that I have seen it happen over and over again, that Congress has applied a political solution to an economic problem over and over again. And it will happen probably on Social Security, but I don't think it happens in the short term. George Bush tried to change it in 2005. He gave 30 speeches around the country. He politically had his head handed to him and finally had to recede from the effort of trying to bring a solution in place. But I would throw into the middle of this with Medicare, Social Security, tie the two of those entitlements together, and health care while we're at it. And here's my dream piece of legislation, my dream bill, and it'd be this, that let's just say a young couple that might have started out with a health savings account in 2003 or 4 when it was first enacted. If they had maxed out, and all can't do that, but if they maxed out at $5,150 for a couple and in their health savings account and did that every year and compounded it at historical compound interest rates, still paid out $2,000 a year in normal health care costs, their health savings account at arriving at Medicare and Social Security eligibility would be $950,000. Today, the present liability of an individual who becomes eligible for Medicare is around $72,000 per individual. So we have to adjust all this for inflation and get some smart economists to recalculate. And what I'm going to tell you is a little more optimistic than the reality. But seriously, $950,000 and you subtract two $72,000 checks to buy a paid-up Medicare replacement policy, sends that now once young, now retired couple off into retirement, no longer in the entitlement rules for Medicare because they bought a private sector policy that would be available under your vision and mine, and no longer under one of the entitlement people for Medicare, and with still with the Social Security benefit coming their way, they wouldn't have to be as strong as it has to be if they have to rely on it, and the balance of that can become their pension. So what's left out of that, the federal government's interest in your HSA when you retire is to tax it when it comes out, because there's not a reason for it any longer for the big pieces of it if you're eligible for Medicare. I say, by replacement policy, let the couples that do that, individuals too, keep the change and let that be their retirement fund, or they can will it to their children, they own it. That's what we should do in a sane, free enterprise society to empower people. So, and then Kenny, the balance of this on the farm bill piece of it, there's just the beginning of the debate that's going on. And we want to make sure that what is left after all the budget cutting comes forward, what's left out of that is a safety net for our farmers. And I want to provide that we have an incentive there for the soil conservation, water quality piece that you and I spend a lot of time looking at. I hope we can do all of that, and we're going to get hit. It's going to reduce the resources coming into agriculture. By the way, the nutrition component of this is 70% of the funds going into the farm bill. And so if they want to cut $1 out of agriculture, proportionally, the balance of that, I think, needs to be reduced in proportion. So there's the kind of look at it. Thanks. You shoot the birds against something.
Thank you, Mr. King. I have just a couple little comments here, and I'm going to try to be brief. I want to say this not because I'm outnumbered 60 to 1 here, maybe 70 to 1, but I was myself very disappointed in Mr. Obama and what's happened. I do kind of somewhat understand that, but the fact that I was recently elected as mayor here at Denison, and I thought, you know, I could make a difference, but if you don't have the backing of your beliefs in your house or in your council, you don't get much done. Why did I vote for Mr. Obama? Certainly not because he's black. That's one of the rumors. I didn't want to make history. I voted for him for two reasons. A year and about a month ago, I gave the farewell speech at the high school to the National Guard that left from Denison, Iowa, and it really hit home with me that these young men were going to be gone for a year from their families in a god-awful place. A month ago, I was asked of all the politicians, Why, I don't know, but I was asked to give their welcome back speech, and I was very fortunate that none of them were missing. They all came back to us, thank God. I guess the reason I'm so disappointed in Mr. Obama is that he pretty much promised us that this war would be over. I think that's draining our economy terribly bad, and it's a god-awful place over there that no one from here should be, in my opinion. That's the first point. The second point was, I wanted something done with insurance. And the insurance, I certainly didn't want 2,600 pages written. What I wanted was something that would stimulate the economy and yet give me somewhat of a break. I keep talking about me here, but I think there's a lot of people in the same boat I am. And last year I paid $15,600 for insurance. It's gone up and it's gone up and it's gone up under Mr. Obama. I thought when we were going to get some insurance, we would get some relief to this insurance cost. It's costing about $1,200, $1,300 a month. In my opinion, if someone, whether it be the Tea Party, the Republicans, or the Democrats, could come up with some way that you could turn the clock back 10 years to when I was paying $500 to $600 a month, that would be a whole bunch better than the $300 one-time gift from Mr. Bush, because we'd be getting $600, $700 every month to spend and stimulate the economy. With the troops being brought home, the insurance being under control, and my last big gripe is there's probably no reason in the world that anybody's ever going to talk me into that we need to pay $4 a gallon for gasoline. Those things are what broke us as a country, in my opinion. Now, I know, I realize I'm quite the minority here, and I'd like to let you answer those questions. Thank you very much for letting me here today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Danny, we have been friends for a long time, and I appreciate you being close here and participating in all this. The war situation, when we go into war, that is a very, very heavy decision. And it isn't just the idea that you need to have an exit strategy. If you enter into it, you have to have a victory strategy. The victory strategy is the exit strategy. I look back through when I first went out there, they were mobilizing for the Iraq War. We were already in Afghanistan. And I remember that unfolding. I remember the gut check. I knew that it was a tipping point in history. And we had a victory strategy. It was a short-term victory strategy, but we didn't have a means to follow through. And I look back on that in Iraq. You didn't ask that question, but I think the biggest mistake made there was to dismiss all of the military as Ba'athist. And that meant there was no structure in Iraq to sustain the functions. And we found out months later that there were entire cities that were taken over by the enemy again, and no one was there to reject them. That was, I do think that as much as I personally like and respect George Bush, I think he took his eye off the ball in Iraq way wide. He put it back on when he ordered the surge, and it took a courageous leader to do that. A lot of presidents would have never done that. Now we have something that we can call a definable victory in Iraq. Afghanistan is much more complicated. I don't think that we're in a position where we can easily extract ourselves from the operations in Afghanistan. It is, the hardest job is not the security part, that's the dangerous part. But the one that has the least prospect of succeeding is the State Department's job of setting up government services and functions in areas where they never existed before, in a country that's got a powerful centralized government, but it's completely political, all tied to Karzai. Karzai appoints all the governors in Afghanistan, and through that, he controls all the public offices in Afghanistan, which means he can then require that they pay him, we say, a commission for their job. And I'm told that happens. So I don't want to spread that beyond where it is, but it's not a structure for anything except corruption. And then the Northern Alliance, for example, they're the people that beat the Russians. They're the ones that led the cavalry charge on horseback with AK-47s in their hand, charging Russian tanks. They drove the Russians out of Afghanistan with Charlie Wilson's help, for shorthand. And then they gave up their heavy, well then they're there. America didn't fill that vacuum. Al-Qaeda filled the vacuum, and the Taliban. Taliban, then Al-Qaeda. Then we got attacked in 2001, almost 10 years from now, 10 years ago, and the Northern Alliance was there. And we put some weapons in their hands, and we had air cover, and we directed fire, and the Northern Alliance drove the Taliban out of Afghanistan. They then accepted the American-presented Constitution, which gave the power to Karzai, as I mentioned, to appoint all the governors and run the country. It cut the Northern Alliance out of this. The Pashtun tribe in Karzai run almost everything in Afghanistan top down. It is a mess. I think they need a new constitution. I think the Northern Alliance needs to have representation. They are our natural allies there. I don't think we can unravel that with the President and the State Department we have, because I don't think they understand this, or they don't like the conclusion they must draw if they do understand it. So I don't want to walk away from it either. It's just a tough place to be. I have a solution to a longer answer. Glad the troops are home. Iowa has paid a high price and sacrificed a lot. And the insurance piece of this, I'd like to back up and start this again and not have this long debate about Obamacare. I'd like to just go with this. Let's expand the HSAs, as I said. Let's allow people, insurance companies, 1,300 of them we had going into Obamacare, with 100,000 policy varieties. Let them compete in every state. Let Kentucky sell insurance in New Jersey, where they can sell a policy to a typical young male at $1,000 versus $6,000 in New Jersey for a healthy 23-year-old male. Sell insurance across state lines, repeal McCarran-Ferguson Act is what it is. And then, let's address the tort reform. That's about $208 billion a year. So that's a couple of trillion over the budget window of 10 years that we have. And so we address then the defensive medicine, the unnecessary tests that we have in the tort reform piece of it. Sell insurance across state lines. Let it be competitive again, and let people buy the policies that they want. We really didn't have that many uninsured. A lot of that was trumped up to try to pass Obamacare, in my view. I want all energy all the time. I want to drill everywhere all the time. I want to drill ANWR, the Outer Continental Shelf, the non-national park public lands. I want to produce more ethanol, biodiesel, wind. I want more nuclear. Let's do clean burning coal, natural gas, geothermal, hydroelectric. I want it all. And we're producing 72% only of the energy that we consume. I want that to be 100% of the energy that we consume. And if we can't fill the gap with what we produce, and we can, we're an energy-rich country, then let's bring it from Canada, not Saudi Arabia, not Libya. So, Denny, we have to do this. We'll go to Jerry and then the lady in the back.
My name is Gerald Pallison, the old geezer from Marcus. We have a rather ridiculous...
I know you, Jerry.
Yes. And Congressman, I want to thank you personally for the representation that you give us from Western Iowa in the Congress of the United States. Thank you very much. Now, we have a ridiculous situation in Marcus. The street going west out past my house has a ridiculous 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, and that's stupid. So I am allowed now to drive 35 miles an hour on that road, right? Because we are no longer a nation governed by the rule of law. When you have the AG, Eric Holder, state that he refuses to prosecute the Black Panthers in Philadelphia because they are my, quote, they are my people. When we have the President of the United States stating that he does not believe, or he believes in same-sex marriage, therefore he refuses to enforce the law of marriage. We have all these things happening. We have such blurred lines between our three distinct branches of government anymore. Congress, it appears to me, has advocated their ability, or their given mandate to regulate or to pass laws. We have the President of the United States deciding that he doesn't need to pass an amnesty law through Congress. He has done it, in fact, passed the DREAM Act without any authority to do that. He can invade Libya without going to the Congress to get permission to do that. And the same thing is going to happen in Libya as happened in Egypt and happened in other countries on there. The Muslim Brotherhoods are all set up to take over those nations. Israel is going to be left standing alone, our only true ally left in the United States. And I have questioned whether the administration will back Israel in protecting its own borders. I think this is a travesty. And what am I, as a loyal patriot of this country. What action am I supposed to take now, Congressman?
Well, keep speaking up, and that's what a lot of it has to do. What you know, what Jerry has laid out here, I agree with it on down the line, is what I've seen happen as well. I took notes here on all of it. The new Black Panthers, that's, you know, voter intimidation in Philadelphia in the 2008 election, and it was the most clear-cut case of voter intimidation in the history of this country. It was an open and shut case. They had a consent decree. They had a guilty plea and consented to that guilty plea. And then when the Obama administration came in, they decided to release it. And we had the Assistant U.S. Attorney, Tom Perez, come before the Judiciary Committee under oath and answer my question. And I believe that he directly lied to Congress. He said that he'd achieve the maximum penalty possible under the law. And Cassie was in that room. We both saw that and heard it. And that's the kind of administration we have. Founding fathers imagined that each branch of government would jealously protect the power that it had within the Constitution. I think that they calculated that the legislature would jealously protect our power. We haven't done that. It's not in the will of the Congress. It's in my will. I have a will to do that. But to give you an example, on the Terry Schiavo legislation, and I was in the Capitol that weekend and helped craft that, and we called the Congress back on Palm Sunday. Now, regardless of what you think of whether Congress should have intervened, I will tell you the reason that I wanted to when we did intervene, and that is because Terry Schiavo was voiceless. She had no one to advocate for her except her husband. Her husband had a conflict of interest, and a mass murderer would be able to appeal all the way to the Supreme Court. But someone who cannot raise their voice to speak for themselves has no recourse if the one single person that is responsible for their care decides that they don't want to intervene. So we directed the courts, and it's all constitutional, the Terry Schiavo legislation directed the courts to hear the case, hear it without delay, and do a de novo review, a complete review of the case. 3 directives direct from Congress. It became law. It was signed by President Bush. We did that on Palm Sunday. Bang, bang. And speaking of bipartisan or ecumenical, I'd be glad to hear this, Denny. I was standing next to Tom Harkin on the floor of the United States Senate when he delivered the closing argument in favor of the Terry Schiavo legislation. So he had different reasons than I had, but we were in the same place on it for a conclusion. And the courts defied the directive of the Congress. They delayed, then they heard the case, then they did a partial review, not a complete review. So the only thing they actually did was heard the case that we directed them to do. And Congress should have drugged them back on the carpet, cut their budget, brought them in for hearings, and made a public show of it. But instead, there was a poll that came out on CBS News that said 72% of the public thought we should not have intervened. So by the time I even saw the results of this, the chairs in the House and the Senate of the Judiciary Committee and the President all capitulated and essentially given up the position that we had. Didn't jealously protect our power, and we lost some ground. That's one example. They are legion. You covered a lot of territory. The President's refusal to defend the Defense of Marriage Act is a constitutional obligation he has. I don't know that I really want to, though, have an administration that doesn't believe in it. I think he's got an obligation to defend it. But if the President is going to send his Solicitor General to the court and tell him, give the weakest kind of defense of marriage that you can, it sets up the odds that we could be defeated there. So I understand John Boehner is mounting an effort to defend the Defense of Marriage Act in court. But it's wrong for the President to walk away from that obligation. It's, if you send him in there, though, he might throw the game. And I don't need shoeless Joe Jackson in there defending us. I want to defend marriage with some full vigor. But the amnesty piece, we've spoken of that, Jerry, and that's a defiance of the law. It's a defiance of the will of the public. And what's their justification? Congress is deadlocked. Well, if Congress didn't pass legislation, does that mean we're deadlocked? Or does it mean that the American people don't approve of the legislation that was offered? I think it's the latter. So what I leave out, Israel. Israel is, and long has been, the only place in the Middle East where an Arab could get a fair trial. And I think the President has undermined Israel's security and some of the positions that he's taken. And That is, that puts them in a more precarious position and empowers their enemies who surround them. If you ask their enemies, where should Jews be able to live, they will say, anybody, anywhere, somewhere else, not there. They don't have any business living even in Judea, which, where Jews have lived since antiquity. And I do not understand the anti-Semitism in this country. I have a strong support for Israel, and I hope we elect a president that has a strong support for Israel rather than undermines it. I know we didn't hit them all, but I hope to be there. Thank you. Okay.